once the panel discussion begins. So we are recording, and with that, we will go ahead and get started. To begin, we'd like to acknowledge that New York University is located in ancestral Lenape homelands, and it recognizes the long-standing significance of these lands for Lenape nations, both past and present. We are conscious that New York City has the largest urban Native population in the United States. We believe that historical awareness of Indigenous exclusion, and erasure is critically important and are committed to working to overcome their effects in our own educational institutions. And with that, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar about housing in New York. My name is Christy Mino. I work here in the Office of Graduate Marketing and Admissions Consulting. Prior to my role, I lived and worked in San Francisco. And before that, I worked here at NYU in residential life and housing services. So I've got a good deal of experience living in high rent cities and with the housing process more generally. Here in New York, I have lived both in Manhattan on the Upper East Side and in Greenwich Village, and then also in Williamsburg and Greenpoint in North Brooklyn, where I live now. Just a little context before we get started. We also have a really great group of current students joining our panel discussion later in this session, living across New York, and they'll be sharing their experiences. But before we turn it over, we'll look at today's roadmap. So we're going to talk generally about the search process, tools, resources, neighborhoods, factors to consider as you're narrowing your own housing search here in New York. And then we will discuss some of the things you need to know in order to secure an apartment, such as working with a broker, using a guarantor, signing a lease, all the logistics that you need in order to really sign on the dotted line and move into your apartment. And then we want to spend the bulk of this time talking to and hearing from current NYU students about their experience. Again, as I mentioned, we'll open the question and answer box within the Zoom platform once we begin our panel discussion. Before submitting your question, take a look. You're able to look at other questions that are asked. You're able to upvote questions that are similar to yours. And the more votes that we get, the quicker we'll be able to get to those. And just as a general disclaimer, the advice that we're sharing throughout today's session are largely based on our own personal experiences. We will share the resources that have worked well for us and also provide links that are available on the NYU websites. These resources are not officially endorsed or affiliated by NYU. Our goal with today's session is really to provide you with the foundation from which you can begin your search process and feel confident that you can navigate the process. And so we're really hopeful that this will be a helpful session for you. And so with that, let's dive in. So on-campus housing for NYU graduate students is limited with the exception of a few small programs. At this point, we're on a waitlist system. And so the chances of you securing a spot are fairly low, but we will put a link into the chat now with information in case you're interested. But I just wanted to acknowledge that, yes, there is some on-campus housing for NYU graduate students. It's likely full at this point. And so we are going to spend our time today talking about how to find an apartment outside the NYU housing network. As a framework, the off-campus housing website provides a number of useful resources and step-by-step guides that you may find useful. And so we'll also be putting a link to that in the chat as well. The best place that you can start your search is by setting your expectations around your budget. Consider your source of income during your time as a student. Will you have savings, loans, scholarships, other jobs? And then use that as a framework to guide your budget. Think about how you want to spend your time in New York. Are you the type of person that likes to spend a lot of time at home? Is your program super demanding and so you'll be dedicating your time solely to your schoolwork? Or do you want to seize and make the most of your time in New York by exploring New York and all it has to offer through restaurants and Broadway shows and other opportunities? Those things will also factor into your budget. Utilities, typically with the exception of water, are not included in the price of your rent. Often you are responsible for paying your gas, electric, and internet bill. So those are things to also consider. And again, we'll be sharing some budget resources in the chat as well. At the same time you're working through your budget, you should also start researching information about different neighborhoods in different locations throughout New York. Location is one of the largest impacts on price. NYU's Washington Square campus is located in Greenwich Village, which is one of the more expensive neighborhoods in Manhattan. And sort of as you move away and out from this area where our campus is into other boroughs and into surrounding cities, the price tends to decrease, or in some cases, your money will go a little bit further. You may be able to get a bigger apartment for the same price. Some common neighborhoods for NYU students, and with this, NYU students live all across New York and the surrounding areas, but some common places that we tend to see students living are up and down the east side in Manhattan, so the East Village, Lower East Side, the Upper East Side into Harlem. But a lot of the neighborhoods in Manhattan are conveniently located in relation to campus because Manhattan as an island is fairly small. But then into Brooklyn, I know a lot of Brooklyn campus students live in Bay Ridge because it's convenient to the downtown Brooklyn campus. Bushwick and Williamsburg are also really accessible locations in Brooklyn. And then into Queens, Astoria, and Long Island City are really popular as well. And then we have a number of students who live in New Jersey, Jersey City, and neighboring areas are popular, as well as parts of Westchester, north of New York. And so this map, get myself out of the way, this is the Tri-Cities, Tri-State area. And so all of these areas are accessible through public transportation. The most convenient way to travel around New York City is by public transportation. The bus and subway systems are extremely comprehensive and run 24/7 for the most part, allowing New Yorkers to get almost anywhere they need to at any time of day. There are several subway lines that connect to stations near many of the NYU buildings. Additionally, the city is extremely pedestrian friendly, so a lot of people are able to walk or bike as their primary form of transportation as well. And then members of the NYU community also have access to the NYU shuttle, which travels between various locations around the city where NYU buildings are situated. And that's another thing I want to note when you're considering your neighborhood and where you want to live, is taking into account where your classes are housed. Not all of our classes are on the main campus. So some programs have their classes in Midtown, Manhattan, others might be in Brooklyn. And so taking a look at where your classes are for the most part will help you determine neighborhood and factor in your commute. And then one other thing when considering location is the type of neighborhood, and what you find desirable, what you want will really depend on your personal circumstances and what you're looking for out of your New York City experience. So students with families are likely going to be looking for different features in their neighborhood than younger students or students right out of undergrad who may not have families to factor in. I find that blogs and social media are great resources in terms of understanding different neighborhoods, because from neighborhood to neighborhood, the feel and the vibe of the neighborhood and what you have access to really can shift. And so if that's something that's important to you, spend some time researching and reading about different neighborhoods. I also find that using things like Google Street View can give you a sense, if you're not able to visit in person, to understand sort of the neighborhood vibe, get a sense for what businesses are in the area, and then also factoring in and checking out what your commute might look like using resources like Google. The next thing to consider in your initial search are narrowing down your wants and your must-haves. Start big and then narrow down as needed. So things that you might want to factor in are, do you need an elevator for health or family reasons, or would it just be convenient to have? What about laundry and access to laundry or a dishwasher? For some people, these are really easy concessions to make in favor of perhaps location. So someone might prioritize what they consider a prime location, but will forego having laundry in the building. But for others, they could be deal breakers for a variety of different reasons. And so that's why it's important for you to determine your non-negotiables and sort of use that as a foundation for your search, recognizing that, the list of non-negotiables might need to be a short one depending on where your location is. So those things can go hand in hand. And then finally, once you're pulling all these things together, utilizing search tools to help you combine it to get a better sense of what you really can get and what's realistic for you. These are tools that are helpful in, you can specifically indicate. I personally really like StreetEasy. I find that that's a really useful resource for the New York market in terms of you can specify, you want to be in you want laundry in your unit, or you want laundry in your building, or you're searching specifically for no fee apartments, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or elevator apartments. But you can really fine tune by neighborhood, by factor, and by these different apartment features that will help you better narrow down your search and see what's available. So once you've combined and compiled all your research to understand the types of apartments and your ideal neighborhood, the real fun begins, and that's the applying part. One of the big factors in that process is whether or not you'll have a roommate. Roommates can help bring down the cost of an apartment. It allows you to potentially access different neighborhoods, but also get to meet people as part of your NYU experience. And I see that Joyce just put into the chat a Facebook group, which is one way to help you find roommates. This is an NYU run Facebook group that can help you either connect with people who are also looking for apartments, but also some people might be posting on there if they have an apartment or they have a room that's available, perhaps one of their other roommates graduated. That's another way that you can help find an apartment, is by connecting with others and researching and searching together as a group. The next step in terms of getting ready to apply is preparing your documents. Before you can apply for an apartment, you'll need to collect some things together. The exact requirements are going to vary depending on the apartment type and even the location, but generally speaking, you should have ready and be prepared to share proof of income, which we'll talk about in a moment, a government ID or a passport. A letter of acceptance from NYU is useful, particularly for international students. If you're working on campus or you received a scholarship or a fellowship from NYU or from an external funding source, it's helpful to get a letter that states how much you make as part of that position, or what your start date, anything to indicate where your source of funding will come from. And then sometimes you may be asked, if you can, to provide a reference letter from a previous landlord or contact information for previous landlords. One tip is to make sure that you have all your paperwork organized in a PDF file so that you can easily email that. If you find an apartment that you really like, that you don't have to spend time gathering these things, they're all ready to go. So these are items to consider and start preparing now. In terms of financial requirements, many landlords will require that you earn X amount of times the monthly rent. So in Manhattan, that can be 40 to 50 times the amount of monthly rent. So in particular, if let's say an apartment is $1,500 a month, you would need to show approximately $60,000 in annual income. In the outlying neighborhoods or boroughs, landlords may require less. Sometimes it's 30 to 35. It really just depends on the location and the apartment. Roommates and roommate shares and sublets may require less, but generally speaking, you'll need to show proof of income. That's a lot of money, and we recognize that for students, definitely it can be difficult to meet those income requirements. And so guarantors could be an option. So a guarantor is a co-signer or someone who is willing to take on the financial liability of your lease, essentially, if you're unable to. But from a leaser's perspective or a landlord's perspective, it's someone that's guaranteeing or supporting you to pay that if you're not able to. And so it's important to understand that landlords may accept multiple guarantors, but they may not. And one way that you can go about finding this is if you have somebody who lives in the United States. Oftentimes what we'll see, particularly for domestic students, is they will have a family member that lives in the States. They have a US bank account. They're familiar with the system. They will sign with a student. If you are moving to the US from a different country and you don't have anybody who's available to do that, there are services that also can serve as a guarantor. And so we've put in the chat some resources for international students because we see that's common with people who are moving from out of the country. utilize one of these resources. Again, it really will depend on the building, and we will talk a little bit about it during the panel discussion about what that looks like. But this is a resource that's available, and something that's common is using a cosigner or guarantor to secure your lease if you don't have the finances on the back end in order to do that or to apply for that. Other financial requirements will be a security deposit. So landlords may ask for typically a month of rent as a security deposit. There may be also situations where if you aren't able to have a guarantor, they will ask for more of a security deposit. So it just depends on the building. But something to keep in mind is that you will need access to enough money to pay that first month security deposit. Shortly after you sign your lease. So if you're moving here, it's important to set up a US bank account as quickly as possible in order to help you secure that apartment. In terms of timeline, housing in New York moves really quick. So that's, I think that's good news. It can be stressful, but it's good news. So for those of you on this call who are starting classes in September, congratulations. Welcome to NYU. We're super excited. And now is a really great time for you to start thinking about and getting serious about your search. Apartment leases are usually signed roughly 4 to 6 weeks in advance of a move-in date. So we're right in that sweet spot for early September. Once apartment is available to lease, things move really quickly. It can be a couple of days, a week, a couple of hours from when an apartment is released to when a lease is signed. So that's just another reminder to make sure that your application materials are ready to go so you can submit them in a timely manner. But then also don't feel discouraged if you don't get an apartment that you like. There's a lot of apartments that are available in New York, which is also great. One other thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the panel, if you're unable to visit New York before classes begin, we've heard of people opting for short-term rentals like an Airbnb while you look at apartments in person, just to give you a feel for what you're able to see and what you're able to get. But again, housing moves really quick. Now's a really great time. So this is super timely for everybody in terms of getting ready and starting that search process. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our panel because these are the students who have been in your shoes not that long ago, who are really familiar with what that housing search process looks like. We're also going to now open up the Q&A box so you can drop your questions in there. And I am going to stop sharing my screen and ask our panelists to now join us. And we'll kick things off with, sorry. All right, while I work, there we go. So we are going to go ahead and ask our panelists to turn on their cameras, and I am going to ask each of them to quickly introduce themselves. I'd love to hear from you, your name, your school or program, where you live in New York and your current living situation. So do you have roommates? What sort of space are you living in? And if you'd like to talk about something that you love about your current living situation or something that you find enjoyable, that would be great. And I'd also like to ask you to share about your commute to campus. I think it's really helpful for people to understand where and how long it takes them to get to campus. And so we are working to allow everybody to turn on their camera. And in the meantime, while we work on that piece, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves while we work on that. So Shannon, could you kick us off with intros and we'll get everybody's video turned on while you do that?
Yeah, I'm Shannon. I'm living in Bushwick right now. I'm in a 4-bedroom apartment. What were the other things? I'm from New Fairfield, Connecticut. I've been in New York for 5 years. And I've lived in a few different neighborhoods. I would say my favorite thing about my place now is that there's a lot of fun stuff to do. So I'm right across the street from this really cute coffee shop called Cup of Brooklyn. And there's a lot of like cute thrifting and stuff like that in the area. As far as my commute, I would say to NYU, it's like 45 minutes. I take the J train, and then I transfer to the M train. But depending on where I'm going, sometimes I can just get off the J, because NYU buildings, do vary by location, but I would say that's usually what I do. It's actually only 4 stops, but it's just that I have to transfer trains in the middle. But yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Omika, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself as well.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Omika Bajaj. I am from Mumbai, India. I am doing my master's in integrated marketing at the School of Professional Studies. I live in the financial district area and I really, really like it. I live in a 3-bed, 2-bath, which is actually a 2-bed flex, which is something that you guys might have seen already or will see when you're looking at apartments in the city. It's super common, but I really like my area. It's very accessible to the rest of the city. We have, because it's close to the World Trade Center and a lot of people commute in and out of the city, we have the PATH station really close by, so it makes it easy for me to go to Jersey to see my friends if I ever need to. And also, we have the AC 2, 3, J train 4, 5. So it's super accessible. So that makes it very easy. And also it's very close to Brooklyn. So I think the location was the prime spot for me. And also I do have a doorman and an elevator, which was something that I got lucky with, but I really enjoy staying in the building that I stay in. And yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Dominic, I'll have you introduce yourself next.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Dominic. I'm originally from Europe, and I've been living in a studio in Kips Bay for about 2 years now. I'm very happy with the studio, especially since my building is very close to a subway station, so that's super convenient for me. I don't have to, rely on Ubers or have to walk for a long time if it's rainy outside. So that's something I very much value about my apartment. But then again, it also would only take me about 30 minutes to walk to campus. So if it's a nice day, that's also super convenient. So if you're looking for apartments, definitely have a look at where your building will be located and how long it takes you to get to campus and what options there are, because maybe on some days the subway just won't run, and then it's convenient to have a bus line or something nearby to get to campus.
Great. Thank you, Dominic. And then Tassine.
Hi, my name is Tessie. I live in Stuytown, which is just above East Village. It's a community living space, and yeah, it's a 3-bedroom apartment. It's technically a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 bedroom that is a flex situation. Yeah, it's the 3 of us, and Stuytown is basically, for me, it's a 30-minute walk to the campus, which is the Washington Square Park campus, where most of my classes are. And for me personally, I do prefer walking because I'm not able to fit any form of other exercise in my schedule. And it's just easier for me to access Jersey or Brooklyn, go to my friends' places, or also I forgot to mention I'm in the journalism and international relations program. So for me, it's very important to be able to access the city as a journalist. So I feel like my location is really good for that. And apart from that, it's a community living space, so it has a very family friendly vibe. There are a lot of students, but mainly like there are trees around me. It's a very safe space. They have security over there, and the building is accessible through a key card. So in terms of safety, I know like my parents are okay and sleeping at night. So yeah, all of that was important to me, and I went for it.
I love the idea of using your commute for exercise, double dipping as a student, time management. That's great. Thank you all so much for your intros and for joining us today. I really appreciate it. My next question is specific to your housing search experiences. I'd love for you to share the tools that you used and sort of, I think Tassine, you talked a little bit and everybody about narrowing down your neighborhood and finding what's important, but if there are things that you haven't shared about narrowing down your neighborhood. And then there was a question in the chat that was related in terms of looking out for scams. So when you're researching apartments, how can you tell if it's for real? And if you have roommates, sharing how you found your roommate would also be really helpful. So another 5-parter question, but about the search process. Okay, you're unmuted. Do you want to kick things off with this one?
Yeah, for sure. So I found my roommates through Facebook. I found one of them through Facebook, and then through them, I found the other one. And so it worked out really well because, in my opinion, it's better to find roommates first and then look for an apartment because, as Christy said, NYC apartments move really quickly. So to find one and then look for roommates might slow down the process. So that really helped. So once we had, I had my flatmates locked down. We looked everywhere. The main platform we looked at was Street Easy, and we also joined a lot of Facebook and WhatsApp groups. So there happened to be an apartment that someone shared on a WhatsApp group that we really liked because we were searching for something. We definitely wanted an elevator. My flatmate had her campus on the Washington Square Park campus, and mine was the Midtown campus. So we were looking at something that was not more than a 20 to 30 minute commute to each of them. So a financial district worked out really well. And we also wanted laundry, not in unit, because that could get really expensive. But we definitely wanted it in the building, and we also got lucky with that because we have it on every floor. And we weren't too particular about having a dishwasher and all of those extra amenities because as students we cook and we do as much as we can at home. But yeah, in terms of amenities, that's what was important to us, and we saw it on WhatsApp and we got it. Also, in terms of scam, it could have also been a scam, but we verified because it came through broker who was partnered with another brokerage company. So we knew the building was under a company that had many other listings that in the same area. So we gave it a go and it worked out. So I would say in terms of listings, look it up if it's available on Street Easy. If you're going through a broker, if he's done any other deals that he can show you, or like if he shows you multiple listings, that sometimes helps to know that he's verified. And also check out if the building is listed under any company, which is something that I've noticed a lot in the city, that a lot of buildings are listed under different companies. So yeah, that was my search. And since we were international students, like Christy mentioned, we did need guarantors, and I think even domestic students do need guarantors. So we did have someone in the city that could act as a guarantor for us. And we also had to submit our own documents like the I-20 and an acceptance letter so that they know that we are also definitely students and they need to verify our identification as well.
On the topic of guarantors, because I know this is popular conversation, does anyone else have experience, or how did you specifically find your guarantor, Omika?
So my flatmates had like relatives in the United States,
Okay.
so they helped us to submit some documents and act as a guarantor for us. But I do know other classmates who used third-party guarantors, which one of them is called basically the guarantors, another one is called the Rhino. But there are many such third-party places that you can look for guarantors, and I think it's very commonly used, so it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, awesome. That's helpful. And then as everybody else is introduced or answering this question, if you could also, if you used a guarantor, what that looked like. But then also in terms of using your student loan disbursement as proof of income, if you have any experience with that, if you could share that. Dominic, I see you unmuted, so would you like to go next?
Yeah, of course. So I was lucky to find my studio on Street Easy. I think CreateEasy is the most established website in New York City. So that's always a good point to start, especially to get an idea of how much are apartments in the neighborhood that you're looking at, to get a better idea of, does my budget work for the rooms and apartments that are offered in this neighborhood. And as Christy mentioned before, there's really a super short turnaround time. So I think my apartment was posted one day, and then I signed the lease less than a week, like in the same week, basically. So you really got to be on top of those things and have all your documents prepared ahead of time. So that's something you should probably get started on first, to have all those documents ready. Now, I don't have experience with student loans, but I did have a scholarship. So of course I had to have my scholarship letter ready. I had like personal financial documents ready. I had my NYU admission documents ready. Proof of, a US bank account is always a good thing. If you just arrived in New York City, it's always a good thing to, open a bank account first if you don't have one yet. But yes, I did also have experience with a third-party guarantor, because I didn't have any relatives here in the US that could act as a guarantor, and that didn't have the financial means myself. So I did use the guarantors that Omika already mentioned, which worked out great for me. It's pretty easy. You just Google it. You go on their website. You enter the address of the apartment or room that you want to lease. You tell them how much it is, and then they tell you if it's approved, and you have to pay them. It really depends, but it's between about 40 and 80% of 1 month's rent that you have to pay to them. Now, that can be quite a lot, but unfortunately, there aren't many alternatives to international students who don't really have a guarantor in the city. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're budgeting. Oftentimes you think, oh, this is my first month's rent and this is what I prepare for. But in fact, you also need to add to that the security deposit that you need to pay, potentially a broker's fee if there's a broker. And then if you need a third-party guarantor, also a third-party guarantor. So you need to have those funds available before you can actually sign your lease.
Thank you, Dominic. That's really, really helpful information. And it feels like it's a lot, because there are a number of things that you need to line up, and there's a lot of cash that you need liquid and available. But like you said, this is the reality of the New York housing market. And so I think knowing those things in advance, and knowing that there are ways to do that through the guarantors and things like that, I think is really helpful. And it's really important to factor in when you're working on your budget, particularly that upfront budget cost as well. Tasneem or Shannon, do you have anything else to add to this?
Thankfully, I had family friends in the US. I don't personally have any relatives. Also, you'll have to consider, because they will be your guarantor, their credit score might be affected, whether you pay rent on time or not. So make sure you also respect the fact that they are your guarantor. For me, I didn't have to look for a guarantor because the room I found was already taken by somebody who deferred their year, and then I was subletting from her. And yeah, the new place I've found for the next semester onwards is similar situation, where this person is already on the lease. They have their credit score and income on the lease. It's just that I'm an occupant, so I have to do my dealings with her as a sublet more than anything else. So subletting situation might work for you if you're an international student, but I wouldn't count on sublet situations for a year. I just happened to get lucky. But yeah, that's it for me.
So this is actually my 4th apartment in New York, so I've had a lot of experiences, and I'm looking for another one now because I'm actually subletting for the summer. So this is like a temporary place for me. But I've done a lot of these. So, when I first moved to the city, my first 2 apartments I just got based on my income, because I made 40 times the rent, because I worked for a number of years before I was a student. So I never had a personal guarantor or anything. Now that I've been a student, I have used the third-party guarantor, because even though I am a domestic student, I didn't have anyone who wanted to co-sign for me. So I have worked with Insurant and I had a really good experience. It is an additional cost, but I didn't find it to be a barrier. There are some apartments that don't take it, but I got a really nice place that I was really happy with. I will say, like, if you are going to use Insurant, it's a good idea to live with people who are in a similar situation, because they probably won't want to pay that if they're not in that situation. So I lived with a grad student at my last place. And now my roommates are also going to be grad students who are international students. So we're all benefiting from this. So I think that's definitely a good tip. As far as finding roommates, I have found all of my roommates on Facebook or through an app called Roomie. I think Roomie is getting a little less popular, but I had a really good experience with that. I found a really good roommate. And all my apartments, I found all of my apartments on Street Easy, except when I first moved. I had a situation like Tayson, where I moved into an apartment where people already lived. So I just found that on Facebook. They had made a posting of like, hey, we have someone leaving. Does anyone want to come? But other than that, can definitely vouch for Street Easy and Facebook for finding roommates.
Awesome. Thank you all for providing your insight. Wanted to tackle quickly 2 quick questions. Scams, avoiding scams. I think one of the biggest things to look out for are photos. If a listing doesn't have photos, beware, particularly if you're not able to go see it in person. Definitely don't lease it without any photos. If it looks too good to be true, there's a good chance it probably is. I think really the scam piece is really important if you're not able to go and visit in person. So if you have friends, or if you're searching with a roommate, if that person is here in New York already, those are really helpful ways to avoid the scams. And then, spending some time researching. A lot of management companies, people will provide reviews online. So if there's a management company in your building, looking it up online to see what the reviews are, those sort of things. But I think as a general rule, if it's too good, take a second look at it and just make sure. And then, other things, don't send money without having signed a lease, using verified sources for sending money. Don't Venmo somebody the first month's deposit before you sign a lease. You may run into a situation where you do need to put down money to take that lease or that apartment offline and to secure it as your own. That's not uncommon, but the method of which you're paying, and you need to have signed a lease before you do that. So using common sense in a lot of these situations as well in terms of avoiding scams. So that was one question. And then the other question I saw, I lost it. Shoot, it was a quick question. Oh, cost of transportation, talking about commutes and what that looks like. The subway system, as well as New Jersey Transit, the path are $2.75 a ride, regardless of where you're going. So as long as it's on the subway system or on the path system, you can ride for an hour and a half and it'll still be $2.75. The same as for the buses. Some bus lines, I think, are a little bit more if it's an express bus. There is not a student discount. You can buy monthly Metro cards, which I think you have to use it pretty consistently for it to pay off in terms of using it per ride, but it does give you the flexibility to not have to think twice about it. Sometimes if it's 15 blocks and it's raining, I'm like, do I want to pay or should I just walk? You've got the unlimited, you can ride without thinking. So that is one thing in terms of commuting. Also related to commute in neighborhood, while we're on the topic, there was a question about, not wanting to feel like somebody's missing out on things, depending on where they are. And so this question in particular said, I found a great apartment in Long Island City area, but it seems like a lot of folks are living in Manhattan and Brooklyn. Do you think they'd be missing out living in Queens versus other parts of the city? I will quickly answer this because I live in North Brooklyn, which is right across the little canal from Long Island City. In my experience, I think it's really accessible. Long Island City is really easy. You can get to a lot of parts of the city. There are a number of different train lines that come in and out of Long Island City, as well as different parts of Brooklyn and Manhattan. I think if you have it in your mind that sometimes it'll be a subway ride to get to where you want to be, you just factor that in. And I think it's kind of what you make it in terms of your neighborhood and your accessibility and what you're out there and doing. Brooklyn is enormous. And so you could be in Brooklyn and that still could be an hour and a half commute to get to Manhattan, parts of Manhattan. And so when you're thinking about particular neighborhoods or boroughs, spending some time on Google Maps or your map of choice to determine what your commute time will look like, I think is really helpful. But I think if you're going into your New York experience wanting to embrace the culture and all the things that it has to offer, you'll put yourself out there and you'll commute. There was another question about a 50-minute commute to campus. Again, in my experience, you can read on the subway sometimes, listen to podcasts. The time goes a lot quicker in my experience commuting via public transit than it does sitting in a car. Like a 50-minute car commute feels like, no, thank you. But for some reason, the subway it's usually broken up with a walk and you're reading or you're listening to a podcast or you're doing something, it goes a lot quicker. So those are my 2 cents on some of those questions. My next panelist question is about price, because we understand that that's an important factor, obviously, when you're finding a place to live. If you could all talk a little bit about determining your budget or how you went about that process, and your experience, if you had any recent rent increases, if you're comfortable and willing to share, your rent based on your living situation, I think that's helpful for people to hear as well. But just generally speaking, how you navigated your budget and figuring all of that out. And no pressure to answer, so we'll start with whoever wants to start with this one.
I could talk about this, or Amika, do you want to go first?
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I've had so many situations that have varied so much. The cheapest I've ever paid was $975. That's when I lived in a 3-bedroom in Washington Heights. It had an elevator. It was a super big apartment. Really liked that one a lot. So you can definitely find something cheaper that is really nice. The place that I'm in right now, their rent is $4,000. It's a 4-bedroom, so it's like $1,000 a person. And the last one I lived in was $1,800 because I decided to try out more of like a luxury style building in Brooklyn. And there were certain parts of it that I really liked, but I decided that I feel like I don't need to spend that much. So this time around when I'm doing my search, I'm trying to do like 1,300-ish. And I found a lot of good places in that range if I live with a few roommates. I think having roommates definitely helps a lot.
Yeah, I can share my experience as well. So because I was an international student, and we were looking for apartments back when I was in India, the best thing that I felt was to speak with a lot of different people who were already doing my master's degree and ask them what would be a good rate or what's the best area to live in. So and also because I had roommates, I had to be aware of what they wanted as well. So we narrowed it down to 20 to 30 minutes away from campus. So we did decide to live in Manhattan, which is more expensive, I guess, from Queens and Brooklyn. Our total rent for the entire apartment is $6,375 for a 3-bed and 2-bath. So I personally pay $2,000, which was above my budget, but it had everything I needed. And also, since we were approaching the school year and we hadn't got an apartment, we kind of didn't have an option to, and this is something that we got accepted to. So we took what we got, and it's definitely more on the pricey side. And if I do, but when we renewed the lease, which is this year, they just increased our rent by $25, which isn't very common. I've heard a lot of people, their lease gets by a couple of $100. So in that sense, I guess it worked out in a good way because it's one, really accessible. It's in downtown Manhattan, and also we have a doorman, we have an elevator, we have laundry in unit, we have a gym in the building. So there's a lot of pros and cons to it. Of course, the cons is the rent amount, but the building is really nice.
Great, thank you both. Oh, go ahead, Tissy.
For me, I had a couple of different experiences for Omega. As she said, she found roommates and then she found a place. For me, what was happening was, I was doing that, but then a lot of people will back out on you. Do not take these things personally. You will face a lot of rejections, and it's going to be tough for sure. But it's just how it is over here, and because of that, I was not able to find housing for a really long time. I was in a very it was through a very distant family friend situation. I found a place in Jersey. This is on the Indian Street. And it was nice because it's like a community living space again, a lot of Indians over there. So it was very familiar for me because I'm from India. But at the same time, I wanted to shift somewhere near the college because it at sometimes the path is not very frequent at night, and it would take me anywhere from 15-30 to 45 minutes to reach, and I would just be too exhausted to make it back home, cook myself because I can't afford to eat out over here, and then go to sleep, get ready for the next day, stuff like that. So I was looking in Manhattan, was not able to find anything in my budget. My budget was around 1,000 to 1,200 initially, but that budget of it doesn't work in Manhattan unless like you're willing to compromise on a lot of things. But then I was not able to find anything until I practically would have been homeless until the last day. This girl approved me through Facebook. I found her through Facebook, and she was subletting her place for a year, and it is 1,500, which was obviously way above my budget. But because I had no other option, and I had applied to a couple of other places in Brooklyn, but there were issues with getting approved with the guarantor situation. So for me, I had to go with what I got in the end. And I have adjusted because I'm paying more for rent. I look after my commute because I'm not paying for commute. I don't have to spend like a couple hundred or 200 extra dollars a month. And apart from that, I always, as much as possible, I cook. I budget myself in terms of how much I spend outside on clothes or extra necessities and stuff. So in that case, I'm able to save like $100-200, which was initially what my budget was. And apart from that, my apartment includes electricity, gas, water, all of it is included, heat included, Wi-Fi is included. The only thing I pay for is AC, which is an extra $33. So it worked out for me in the end.
Great. Thank you all for sharing your experiences. I think that was helpful to get a sense of the variety of ways you can go about it and structuring your budget and those sorts of things. So thank you for sharing that. Sort of related and sort of shifting gears a little bit as we're coming up towards the end of our time. I'd love to hear if there was anything unique or unexpected about your experience finding a place in New York. I think some of those pieces have come out, but I know that moving to New York for the first time, it is a really unique environment, and particularly the housing market, because it moves so fast. So outside of things that have been shared so far, were there anything unexpected or unique that surprised you about the process?
Yeah, I think for me, because you're living with certain people for a really long time, I think it's really important to find flatmates that you really that you don't necessarily need to be friends with them, but someone you get along with in terms of, say, your eating habits and your cleanliness. Because what I've noticed is a lot of people say that they're clean, but they're actually not, or you would think you'd get along with them, but once you get to know them a little bit, you probably feel like they're not the right fit for you. So I would say my number one tip is, since you're going to be living with these people for a very long time, before you lock down and confirm with them, get to know them a little bit, maybe chat over FaceTime or Zoom, and like have 2 to 3 calls with them so that you know that this is someone you actually want to live with long term. Because there are a lot of horror. I got lucky, but I've heard a lot of horror stories. So yeah, I think that's like my number one tip.
One thing that I was surprised about when I was searching for off-campus housing was the whole concept of brokers and that there's a broker's fee involved. That's something I wasn't used to from my experience in my home country. If you look on Street Easy, a lot of apartments will involve a broker's fee. Some of them will specifically state that. Some of them won't mention it, but still involve a broker's fee. However, I think Street Easy now has a function that allows you to filter for that. So if you know, hey, I really want to avoid that fee, you can filter for apartments that do not involve a broker's fee at all. So that's helpful. But be prepared for that because again, this is about 1 month's rent and you don't really get too much in exchange for that amount. It's just something that you have to pay to the broker that the landlord has hired to find you basically, even though you are applying to that opening. So it can be very frustrating, but keep that in mind that there can be some hidden fees involved that are not necessarily a scam, but just part of the process. I just saw that they posted a link in the chat about furniture rental. This is also something really helpful. When I first look at the pictures, the apartment were always furnished, and I thought, oh, great, I'll have all the furniture. But those are just pictures to illustrate what it could look like if you put your furniture in there. So I'll be prepared that a lot of apartments might not actually be furnished. I got most of my furniture from IKEA, which was really was relatively cheap compared to other furniture, and they delivered it directly to the apartment. That was super helpful. But again, these will be a couple of $100 that you'll need to pay on top of everything else. So renting furniture can be really helpful, especially if you end the lease at some point and you don't want to worry about what do I do with my furniture. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Thank you, Dominic, for bringing that up. Sorry, Tessin, that was really helpful. The broker piece is really valuable. So thank you for sharing that. I totally forgot to mention that. And as a follow-up, I just saw a question pop in. Fridges are always included in your rental, as far as I know. That would also be a red flag, I think, if an apartment came without a refrigerator. That would be a red flag. Yes, that's included. A stove is, I think, legally required to be included. A microwave may not be included. Tessin, go ahead. Sorry to cut you off.
That's fine. There are a couple of things. First of all, some terms like flex, I did not know what a flex situation is. If they say it's a flex house, please inquire about what kind of flex. Is it a curtain, just a curtain? Is it like a temporary wall? What is going on over there? Apart from that, they might also charge you to put up the flex wall. So inquire about that. In general, know your rights. So it would be good to go through the laws in terms of what are your rights as a tenant, and because in the end, like if you end up in a bad roommate situation or a bad landlord situation, you should know, so that you don't get scammed basically. That makes it easier. And yeah, I mean, I did have a nightmare roommate situation, so Omega is very, very right in terms of trying to find out who you're living with. And I would also personally say that you should also be open to new people, new experiences. New York is a very diverse city. As long as the house is civil, you're able to coexist peacefully, it's clean. And also the walls are very thin, so loud noises might not be the best idea. So all of that considered, it should be better for you to look for somebody who, appreciates and respects you rather than very specifics of what they eat, how they sleep, or stuff like that. I mean, it'll make your choices difficult. And apart from that, again, it really depends. I would also say, like, lower your expectations because there are people who come from countries or cities that are really small with big spaces. If you want to live in Manhattan, the rooms will be very small. They might be dingy. For example, a lot of the places I saw initially, they did not have any sunlight coming into them, and that I cannot possibly live in such a situation, because for me, like, mental health is also, I've realized after living over here, is dependent on the nature, sunlight, trees around me, stuff like that. And it's not something to be ashamed of. Just look for places where you can, if it's a preference for you, look for places that might be facing in different directions according to where the building is situated, stuff like that. So just make a list of things that you might want in your room, and don't get too overwhelmed. If you're posting on Facebook, one thing I've also noticed is some people may not reply, but it's just easier for you to make a blurb about yourself, what your living habits are, stuff like that. So each person that you're texting on Facebook, for you to be a potential roommate, they already know what you're looking for, and that just makes the process easier. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Those are all really helpful tips. We're at time, Shannon. I see that you've unmuted. So let me wrap things up. And then if you all want to share, Shannon, if you want to share some closing words before we leave. So I just want to thank our panelists. I want to thank everybody for participating. A big thank you to our event staff who've been helping answer in the Q&A. We hope that this was really helpful. We'll continue to plug away at some of the questions in the Q&A box. But again, I want to thank you. You will receive a recording and an opportunity to provide some more feedback. And then with that, Shannon, if you'd like to share your closing thoughts, and if anyone else has any final words that you just want to share in terms of your housing search and living in New York. But Shannon, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you do want to live in Manhattan and you have a lower budget, I would highly, highly recommend doing like West Harlem and above, because it's beautiful up there. There's so many college students that live there. Like when I lived in Washington Heights, my apartment was super, super nice. It was actually the biggest room I've ever had, and I paid $975. My room fit a full-size bed, 2 dressers, a couch. I had a huge closet. I had a vanity. It was crazy. We had a dining room. Like, it was crazy. And I just had to travel a little more. I would say from NYU, it was probably like 50 minutes. So it was a little bit of a trip, but it's actually kind of crazy, because the more money I've been paying, the smaller and smaller my room has been getting, because I've been going closer to NYU. So yeah, I would just say, if you have an open mind, I mean, like the Washington Heights apartment I was in had an elevator as well. That was the only amenity it had. And you also might just be surprised about what you really need. Like the building I was just in, it was super nice. And I think for New York, for $1,800 to live with a roommate in a luxury building, like, it's a pretty good deal. I was in Brooklyn. But I ultimately was like, honestly, I was fine without the laundry. I didn't really need it. I don't need a gym. I don't need a lounge. Like, I came out of that and I was like, okay, honestly, the only thing from that I really want was, we had a rooftop. And in Brooklyn, it's pretty easy to find like a cheaper place with a rooftop. Like for my budget of $1,300 with 2 roommates, it's really very doable. So you'd be surprised about like how you can set it up and like how flexible you can be, I think.
Awesome. Again, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you joining us today, and best of luck to everybody with your housing search. We are excited to welcome you to New York in just a few weeks. Thank you again to our panelists, and everybody have a good rest of your day.